Today I'm making a sock. Here's the first of the pair. This pattern is a little unusual in that this is the center front where the seam is. Here's the ankle and here's the foot. Let's back off a little bit so you can see the whole thing better. What I'm about to do is not actually pattern specific, but I thought it would help you to visualize what's going on to see the kind of sock. In this case, I have already knitted the heel. And if I can get where you can see, I'm leaving the weights that I have on the heel in place. But I took off the big weights that I had on the river comb. I'm working here on a Superba, and it prefers quite a lot of weight. And that would make it hard to do what I need to do next, so I've removed it. You are now looking down between the beds, and I have them open quite a bit so that you can see. I still have the cast-on comb hanging there, but for this step I'm going to need to remove it because I'll be folding the fabric basically. Okay, pulling the comb wire out. You won't be able to see very well, but now it's free and it's on the floor, but we won't worry about that right now. The next step is to take 17 stitches off of where they presently are on the left side of the knitting. What I did to get to this point is knit the leg ribbing, changed and knit the ankle ribbing, and they're a little bit different for this pattern because these are knee socks. Knitted the heel, which is also a little unusual before going to tubular, but that's this design. And now I knitted one or two plain rows just to make it easier to aim the needle through the stitches. It's easier if the stitches are all facing the same way. Ribbing, of course, they're not. And it won't be a problem for my pattern. What I'm doing here is freeing the stitches that are already on the needle because I was having trouble manipulating the tip of the needle for these last few. What I'm using here is a circular needle, a very thin steel one. And although I do hand knit on circular needles some, this is not one I would use. I prefer bamboo or wooden needles, and I rarely do handwork this fine of gauge. But I'm using it here in a way that works really well for me, and that is a tool for turning the stitches. Next step, these stitches are now folded over. We've got, between my fingertips is the back of the sock, and it actually extends over to here. And then the stitches to the right of it will go to the front and be the front of the sock. Now I'm working my circular needle back into the stitches so that they are close to the end of it. Here are the 17 needles that I want to hang on, beginning with this one closest to the center of the work. Now I'm going to get them off of the needle that's the tool for us, really, one at a time, and hang them on the needles they will continue knitting on from now on. There's one. I'm trying out a technique using this double eye transfer tool. First stitch went well. I think I probably need to switch tools. This is really the bulky double eye transfer tool. And it goes okay, but it's thick for the job. I selected it because it's also easier for you to see on camera and for me to see when I'm really not able to focus on the work because the camera's in my way. But we will try one more with this. Note that I can go in from either side of the stitch because it's a double-ended tool, same as the needle we're working with is. Just have to make sure not to split that stitch. Get it off, and I can slide the stitch down to the other end and pop it onto the needle. I almost picked up the stitch from the row below that time, so that's something you need to watch for. You can actually see, if you rotate the work up, make sure that the circular needle and the double eye transfer tool are in the same position. Now, as I work, I'm going to quit explaining what I'm doing, because I think we've been over that and you can just watch and get a feel for it, and explain why I'm doing it. This work is more typically done with a rigid multi-prong tool, and you might choose to do it this way instead, because you can see a little bit better if each stitch is seated properly by doing them one at a time. This is the slower way. You can also take a little break, which I'm about to, if your hand cramps or you have some other reason. And I do have another reason. These stitches are starting to act unruly and want to rise up, and I want to find a weight to hang on them to prevent any naughtiness. This claw weight should do. For the Superba machine, claw weights are not enough for sock knitting when we're doing the actual knitting, but they are enough for restraining the stitches from jumping off while we transfer. Now, it's very tempting to say, oh, I have good access over here where my thumb is, I'll just hang this one next. But for me, anyway, I have found that doing them out of order makes the last stitches very, very difficult, so I'm going to refrain. Actually, after that one tight stitch that I experienced, this tool is working fine. Now you can see with the beds this far apart, it's nice because I can get one hand down in between them if I need to, and my left fingers are sort of in between. Time to move these weights. But on the other hand, at the very end, I'm going to have a lot of trouble, so I'll have to close the beds up for that. Another way to do this, besides a rigid multi-prong tool, whoops, mishap. I'll go ahead and leave the camera running because it could happen to anybody. It might happen to you too. I just took a spare needle. Any tool that's handy could be used. Grab the stitch before it ran, and here it comes back to where it belongs. You could also have scrapped off this area. 17 stitches on the left with scrap yarn, 17 stitches on the right. For this pattern, I'm moving 17. It could be any other number depending on your gauge and size. In case you're wondering about the pretty yarn, this is the first time I've used this one, and I'm liking it very well so far. It's a Knit Picks sock yarn. Of course, I haven't finished a sock, worn it, so it hasn't had a fair test, but it's knitted nicely. Also, I was designing, and I was impatient, and I did not first make a prototype with cheaper yarn. And of course, I didn't get my leg length just right the first time and had to unravel and rewind, which is quite a test for the yarn. Does it hold up to that? And it did. It knitted very nicely the second go through too. I'm not recommending that you be impatient. I'm pointing out that the yarn held up to it. It's not a good thing about my character. I think this is the last one that I'll be able to hang before closing up the beds. And I have made a mistake. I'm going to have to go back and fix it. I fear I will have to fix this off camera, but I'll show you what I did. I did pick up the row below, and therefore it ran the stitch above. And you know how to fix that, so do I. We'll put a latch needle or a latch tool in it and latch it back up. But I cannot do it at the angle that I have to be right now. So I'm going to go off camera, straighten that out, and be back to you. All better. Wasn't all that bad. Let's close these beds up. And you see why I preferred to have a little bit of work room. But for these last 3 stitches, it's simply not an option. Here's my needle that's holding. Let's get the last 3 stitches. You will do the same exact thing that we've just done with these 17, with the 17 on the other end of the work. I'm not going to show you those because it's very repetitious. You'll find that one side is easier for you to do than the other unless you're completely ambidextrous. But you can get used to all of them. And there we are. Now, one thing I would like to point out to you. This is positioned at the moment as we would be for full needle ribs. I mean, the beds are positioned. See, if I bring out these needles, they don't hit each other, which is good, but we'll be knitting tubular. So we really want to move the bed so that the needles oppose exactly. On this machine, it's a combination of racking, which, as you see, that didn't really fix the problem. But what I just did. I will try to get the camera where you can see the levers I used. I cannot do it for you at the same time as film. This is the racking lever. This is the one that adjusts from half step to whole step. And so I adjusted it, pushing out. Then when I racked the next time, my needles opposed. Why do we care, you may wonder? Because if in this area you have the needles offset, it makes a bump in the knitting at each side of the sock. It's perfectly wearable and not even uncomfortable. But doing it this way makes a completely smooth transition and is preferable. And though I'm not going to transfer the stitches on this side in front of your eyes, I will show you another little sock skill. The seam is going to be where I'm pointing. We're going to transfer these 17 stitches. And our yarn tail is all the way over here. So to get the smoothest join, we'll go and unknit 17 stitches. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. That will mean that where the yarn tail presently is just perfect. I can resume knitting and begin knitting circular with that yarn tail right here. Let me see if I can sketch it out for you with my finger. We're going to pretend my finger is the carriage. When I move them this direction, set for circular knitting, this side will knit, and this direction, this side will knit. So we'll be going round and round, making a perfect tube starting here, and there will not be a yarn tail to weave in. On a Superba machine, it's very easy to tell what tubular setting is because it actually looks like it. That's the one. It was set for straight knitting, usually stockinette, but anything where every needle knits uses this arrow. And the arrow in a circle is for tubular knitting. After all that set up, I rehung the weights, rehung the comb first, then the weights in the comb, and now we're knitting the circular part of the sock, tubular knitting for the foot. It's simple as can be to do what we just did. I won't say it's easy. It takes considerable dexterity, And if you don't get it right the first time, don't get too upset. You are allowed to cuss a little, but don't go overboard, because it just takes some learning to get it right. It's easier to learn on a bulky if you have one, and then refine the skills to a standard gauge machine. And by the way, I do include Superbas in standard gauge. They have 5mm needle spacings on center, whereas Japanese standards have 4.5. But that's mighty close, and we can produce the same fabrics. Here's the sock we just knitted together. I still need to seam it and close the toe. I already have a toe closing video. If all goes well, this pattern will appear in Country Knitting and Main News and Views sometime in 2018.